up, guys? Hope you guys are all doing well. We just pulled up to Seminole Casino Coconut Creek, about to hop into the 2-5 game. It's a Sunday night, and it's actually pretty freaking cold in Florida for once in March. So let's go in there, hopefully win some money, and I'll see you guys down at the film. Let's go.
You go ahead and sit down with $1,000 in the 2-5 game, and hopefully we can get something going early on in the session. The first eventful hand we get is pocket sixes under the gun. This is a good enough to open it up. So I make it 20 and we see a call from both the blinds. So we're going to be going 3 ways to a flop in position. So the flop is about as ideal as it could possibly come. The flop is ace, king, 6. So we hit bottom set on a board that is very likely to hit at least one opponent. So when they check it over to me, I think this is a spot that I don't really have to size down. If they have an ace, they're calling. If they have a king, they're most likely calling. But yeah, we have a set and we want to get as much money in there as possible. When it checks to me, I decide to bet $45 and dang, both of them let their cards go. Didn't win too much in this one, but hopefully this can foreshadow how the session will go. On to the next one. In this next hand, we're in the big blind with king, queen offsuit, and we see a middle position open to 25. The button decides to call, and I think this is a spot I could either raise or fold. This time I decide to raise it to 150, and we only see a call from the player on the button. So we're off to see a flop out of position heads up. The flop comes out Jack, Jack, 7 rainbow, and this is a board that I think I'm just going to see bet a lot on. I don't expect him to fold all that often, but there can be a lot of good turn cards that we can continue to apply pressure on to smaller pocket pairs, which I think that's probably what he has, considering he just flat called the 25 and now he's flat calling the 150. So when it's on me, I decide to throw out $100, around a third of the pot, and unfortunately he pretty quickly raises to 300. An annoying spot because I just really don't feel like he would ever be doing this with a jack. I mean, sure, he could have a jack here, and I just don't have that much information on this player at the moment. So, you know, you never can just say that people won't do something just because you won't do it. But once again, I just feel like most people will not be raising a jack immediately on this board. He could have pocket sevens, and if I put in another raise as a bluff, that'll just be very ambitious. I think I can just find a better spot, so I'd let my cards go, and we're on to see the next one. In this next one, we looked down at queen 10 of spades in middle position. Early position limps. I decide to make it 30. We see a call from the big blind, and the middle position decides to call as well. So we're going to be going 3 ways to a flop. The flop is pretty good. The flop comes out king, king, jack with 2 diamonds and 1 heart. I decide to put in a smaller c-bet of $35, and we only see 1 call from the player in early position. So now we're heads up going to a turn. So the turn's pretty good. The turn comes a queen. Now when he checks over to me, I'm pretty sure I have the best hand here. I expect a king to raise on the flop pretty often, considering how dynamic it was. A flush draw is not going to be folding. And if he has a jack, I'm pretty sure he's going to be inclined to tag along for 1 more. So now when he checks over to me, I want to be putting in a bet for value. No need to bluff anymore. I decide to bet $80. Once again, not expecting any of those hands to fold that I mentioned. And once again, he decides to just make the call. So at this point, I think we can eliminate all kings out of his range. And once again, I'm still pretty confident I do have the best hand going to the river. So the river comes in. I think it's actually a pretty bad card. It is an offsuit ace. So now we're sitting here with the straight, but it is a 4-liner. So any 10 does make a straight. When he checks over to me once again, I think I could just go one of 2 ways here. I think I could bet really small, targeting literally maybe only a jack. Any busted flush draw is not going to be calling any bet regardless. I don't know. Maybe I can induce with a small bet. But if he does have some, once again, weird king, which I think is actually pretty unlikely, he's not going to be folding, I don't think, because I'd be playing all my busted flush draws this way. I don't know. Let me know what you guys would do here. I just decided to bet big, just basically targeting maybe a weird king. And yeah, he snap fold saying he had a flush draw. So not to be results oriented, but the sizing didn't matter. And we happily get a little bit of value there on the turn at least. This is a pretty fun one. We have king 10 offsuit and there is 1 limper. I'm in the cutoff and I decide to make it $30. We see a call from the player in the big blind and then the limper decides to call as well. So we're going to be going 3 ways to a flop in position. So the flop is pretty good all things considered. The flop comes 10 high. When action checks to me, I think this is a pretty easy c-bet. I decide to bet 2/3 of the pot. I just bet $65. Pretty sure I have the best hand here almost always. I don't expect any 10 to fold, and if someone has a flush draw, they're just simply not folding. The big blind does make the call, and he only has around $260 behind. The limper gets out of the way, so now we're going heads up to a turn. The turn is an absolute dud, and when he checks over to me, I think this is a spot that I can actually just go for it right now. The reason being is because if he has a 10, once again, he's not folding, and I think we can level like maybe a middling pair into a call because we would be playing our flush draws pretty aggressively for the most part. So that's what I do. I just decided to put them all in for like 260, and he pretty quickly calls. So we're off to see a run out, which brings no help to the board, and I show my king 10, and he shows ace 6 offsuit. Wow. Is my image really that bad? I don't know, but happy to get a crying call and happy that the chips are being pushed our way, getting the absolute maximum. In this next one, we see a limp to us in the hijack with 8-9 suited. I make it 30, and then the limper decides to make the call. So we're going heads up to a flop. The flop comes out 3-7-10 rainbow, so we're open-ended with no backdoor flush draw. He checks it to me. I think I'm just want to be betting small here almost always, and he decides to make the call. So we're off to see a turn, which is a 5 of spades. Doesn't change our exact hand whatsoever. We're still sitting here with 9 high. When he checks over to me once again, this is a spot that I still want to be betting. We have a decent amount of equity, and we're still sitting here with 9 high. So I decide to size it up to $80, and he doesn't think for too long and does decide to make the call. So we're going to a river, needing some help or needing a good bluff card, and unfortunately we do not get help, but we do get a good bluff card. The river is an ace. So now when he checks over to me, we're still sitting here with a measly 9 high, which I don't know, don't think 9 high is going to be winning. I decide to size up to $230. At this point, he's going into the tank for what seems like ages, even though as I creep up in stakes as I continue to play poker, bluffs still make me just as anxious as I was right when I started. Yes, bluffs are scary, but you have to do them sometimes, and luckily this time it was successful, as after tanking for around a minute, he does let his cards go. So we happily scoop in a pretty decent pot with a pretty ambitious bluff. In this next hand, we're in the low jack with ace queen off. There's a button straddle. The big blind decides to call the $10, and action is on me. I make it $55, and the only caller we see is the player in the big blind. So we're going heads up to a flop in position. So the flop is pretty good. The flop comes out ace high with 2 diamonds. We do have the ace of diamonds. When actions checks to me, definitely want to be putting in a bet here for value. I throw out $55 around half pot, and he does decide to make the call. So we're off to see a turn, which is a pretty big dud in my opinion. It is a offsuit 4. When he checks over to me, I still think I had the best hand here a lot of the time, so gonna put in another value bet. When I think I'm ahead, just simply gonna bet. I throw out $150, and we get some surprising news. Now he decides to put in the raise. He decides to raise it up to $375. What the heck is going on? How did this 4 possibly improve him? What does he have? Like ace 4 suited? That's literally the only hand I can possibly think of that beats me with the line taken so far. Does he have a slow played set? Regardless, I just think my hand is too strong to let go at the moment. So I decide to make the call, and we're off to see a river. Well, if I was ahead on the flop and the turn, I expect to still be ahead here on the river. The river is an offsuit 3. After thinking for around 5 seconds, he does decide to move all in. The total is $430. If I call it on the turn and the river is an offsuit 3, I just don't think I'm ever folding here, especially for the sizing. If he has this beat, so be it. But this is the same player I've gotten involved with a lot tonight. And unfortunately for him, I think every pot has gone my way for the most part. So he might just be getting kind of sick of it and trying to apply a move. I just decide to make a pretty easy call, and he does say that we are good. So we show the ace queen for top pair, and we happily scoop in the first decent pot of the night. After this one, we're sitting up around $1,000 on the session. Let's go. This next hand is pretty cool. So we have 9-10 offsuit in the big blind, and there is a button straddle. A small blind calls, and I do want to be playing pots with these players, so I decide to make it $50. The rest of the table has been pretty passive, and that is no exception in this one, as they all let their cards go, and the button and the small blind decides to make the call. So we're going 3 ways to a flop. The flop comes 8-8 deuce with 2 hearts, so we don't really have much of anything besides some backdoor dreams. When action checks to me, don't think I'm going to be winning with 9-10 high, so I decide to bet $50, expecting a lot of just random stuff to fold, but yeah, that doesn't happen. They both decide to make the call. We're up to see a turn, which is an ace. Okay, so this is pretty good. This card should be better for me than it is for them. Expecting to be betting this card a lot of the time, but unfortunately the small blind does not give me that option. He decides to lead out for $50 once again. Okay, well there's $300 in the pot and he's betting 50. Would he ever really be doing this with an 8? I think the answer is no. Would he really be doing this with an ace just to try to get a cheap showdown? Maybe, but I think I still have all the strong aces here, and I think if I can raise him and the button gets out of the way, I think we can just apply a lot of pressure on almost any river. So that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna raise it up to $150, and unfortunately the small blind doesn't think for like literally a second and tosses in a black chip. So we're off to see a river. The river comes and it is a king. Okay, this is another card that should be better for me than it is for him. When he checks over to me, once again, I'm just not going to be winning here with my current hand, so I need to be bluffing here. I throw out $400, effectively putting him almost all in, and he goes well into the tank. Obviously hoping for a fold, and luckily for us, he does oblige and let his cards go. Well, that was a close one. Just happy to pull it off. In this next one, we have king, queen off on the button. My friend opens up the action to 35 in the cutoff. We obviously are going to be putting in the raise. Unfortunately for us, he announces blaze it and raises it up to $420. Yeah, just annoying because I can't do anything but fold. And yeah, he's going to be winning this one. In this next hand, we see our early position limper and the button decides to raise it up to 25. I'm in the big blind with ace four of clubs. I think he could be doing this pretty light, so I decide to raise it up to $100. The limper now decides to re-raise all in for a staggering $105. The button calls and I can't isolate, so I just decide to make the call. We flop a pair, a gutter, and a backdoor flush draw on 3, 4, 5 with 2 spades. I think I have the best hand here a lot of the time and I want to protect, so I throw out $125 and the button quickly releases. So now I take back the 125 and now we're off to see a turn in a river. The turn's a jack and the river is another jack. I announce I have 2 pair and we are good. And luckily for us, our bet on the flop allowed us to win the pot because the button is visibly frustrated saying he folded jack 10. So happy to get a good pot pushed my way. In this next hand, we see a new player sit down and he opens up the action to $20 in middle position. I'm in late position and I make it $80 with queen 10 offsuit. Yes, this may be a little bit light, but he did sit down with $1,000 and I do think I want to get involved in pots with this specific player. Sure enough, it does fold back around to him and he throws in some more chips and makes the call. So we're off to see a flop. The flop brings no help. The flop is Jack, Jack 3 rainbow. He checks into me. I decide to bet small and he does decide to make the call. The turn is now an 8 and he checks over to me once again. Don't expect them to be too strong just floating on the flop. Expect them to have a lot of smaller pocket pairs that can probably not withstand another big bet. And also we have a gutter and our queen and our 10 are most likely live as well. So I decide to put in another bet of $150 and once again, he just makes the call. So at this point, I'm still putting him on a smaller pocket pair. I think if he had a jack, he most likely wouldn't be putting more money in now. So I'm planning on applying a lot of pressure on most rivers. So the river peels off and it is a absolute brick. It is a 5. He checks over me once again. And at this point, queen high is not going to be winning the pot. And I think he still has a sticky, smaller pocket pair. I glance at his stack and he is around $600 behind. So I think I'm just going to go for this one. I put him all in and after around 3 seconds, he makes the call. So that's not good. I announce queen high and wow, he shows us pocket 4s. So our read on the situation was actually spot on, but this player just made a pretty sick call and got the absolute maximum. Just a quick note, I still really do like my bluff here. And later on in the session, the same player actually called off a pot size bet with pocket 3s on a board that had all overcards. So truthfully, I think I just bluffed the wrong opponent in this hand, but something to note going forward. In this next one, I do have the button straddle on and we see 2 limps to me. I looked on a queen 10 of diamonds, which is definitely a really good hand to have on a straddle. I bump it up to $75 and luckily for us, the player that we got involved with in the last pot, he is the only caller. The flop comes out 9 jack ace with 2 spades and 1 club. So a really good board. We do have the range advantage, but we are also open-ended. Any 8 or any king will give us a straight. When he checks over to me, it's kind of a tricky spot because this player is known to just not fold anything. And I just got caught bluffing with him in the last hand. But nonetheless, I think a bet here is still probably ideal. I decide to throw out $70 and he decides to make the call. I think I actually could have sized down here just because of this specific player. He doesn't really look at the bet sizing. He just kind of calls when he wants to and kind of just lighting money on fire. Regardless though, he does make the call. So the turn brings no help to my exact hand, but it does bring in a backdoor flush draw. It is a 3 of clubs. When he checks over to me, this is just a player that's kind of like a station. So I just decided to check it back and realize some equity. So the river now is a king of clubs. So we hit her straight, but the backdoor flush does come in. He looks at the board, looks at his hands and looks at the board and now bets $300. Wow. Okay. So we're obviously not folding here, but is this really the kind of player to be overbetting pot with a bluff? I think the answer is no. So now listen, his bet is polarizing, meaning he either has a really strong hand or a bluff. We can't beat many of the really strong hands, which are really flushes, and we don't have any clubs in our hand. So that's very likely. On the other hand, if he has a bluff and we raise, he's not calling regardless. So I think the best course of action here is just to call. So that's what I do. And unfortunately, we get shown the same hand. Chop it up. So now we're about even on the session, which is a bit frustrating, but we're still willing to play and hopefully get some back. In this next hand, we're in middle position with King Jack of Diamonds, and the player that we want to get involved with opens up the action to $10. Yes, only $10. I want to isolate, so I make it 40, and unfortunately for us, a player in late position who is a pretty good and competent player, he raises that up to $140. The player that I do want to get involved with folds, and now action's on me. I think he can be realizing that I'm trying to play pots with this player in position and could be doing this light. I actually don't hate another raise here, but when I look over at his stack and he doesn't have that much, he only has around 600 to 700 behind. I hope if I put in another raise and he jams, I'm just kind of forced to call off. So I just make the call and we're off to see a flop. So the flop is really good. The flop comes out 8 deuce 6 with 2 diamonds. So not really going to be going anywhere on this flop. I check it over to him pretty standard, and he throws in a C bet of $110. So now, obviously, we're not folding. Can we raise here? And I think the answer does depend on the player. He is a sound player, but he is on the slightly tighter side, I would say. So if he does have an overpair, which is very likely, he's just not going to be folding if I jam. But if he does have like ace king, ace queen, 2 overs, if the turn's a brick and he doesn't connect and I lead, he's just going to be forced to fold. So we're not going to be risking as much money, but we're still going to be getting the same outcome. So that's what I do. I just decide to flat call, and we're off to see a turn. The turn brings no help. The turn is an offsuit 10, and I don't want to deviate from my play. I think leading on this card is pretty good. So I throw out $135. Don't really need to go too big. And unfortunately for us, we get the bad news. He jams all in for around $500 total. Obviously, we have 2 overs and the flush draw. I don't think we can do anything but call here. So that's what I do, and we're off to see a river. Unfortunately for us, the river does not improve us. It is an offsuit 3, and we are going to be giving him some chips as he wins with Jack 10 of hearts. So not to be results oriented, but if I would have ripped the flop, it 100% would have worked. Just a bit frustrating, and spots like these are definitely considered running bad. At this point, we are now stuck around 400 on the session, which is very frustrating. In this next hand, we look down at 2 10s in the +1 position. Under the gun opens up to 20. I don't want to be flatting here and having the risk of someone else re-raising behind us and be putting in a miserable spot, so I'm going to do the raising myself. I make it $70. The big blind decides to flat call, and under the gun decides to call as well, so we're off to see a flop. The flop is 7-7-4, and action checks to me. This is a board that I think I likely had the best hand, but I think there's a good chance that they also have overs here. Just a question of whether my overs are better than theirs, and I expect them to be re-raising maybe queens, kings, aces almost always, so the only hand I think I really lose to here is jacks. So I'm pretty happy to put in a bet. 130 is the wager that I choose, and we only see 1 call from the player under the gun, so we're off to see a turn. The turn is not that ideal. The turn is an ace. When he checks over to me, this is a card that is really good for my range, but we still have a lot of showdown with pocket 10s. If I check this back and he bets the river, I'm just going to be paying it off, so why not just bet the turn and check back most rivers besides obviously a 10. So I decide to bet $150, and he once again does decide to make the call. We're off to see a river, which is an offsuit 5. He checks over to me, and now I don't think I can get value from much worse. We have a good amount of showdown, so I check it back, and unfortunately, and pretty surprisingly, he shows pocket queens. So what looked like a pretty miserable turn card most likely saved us a decent amount of money. Nice hand. Now down a lot on the session, when we look down at queen 10 offsuit and the small blind, we see a limp from the player in the cutoff, and I decide to raise it up. I make it $25. The big blind calls, and the cutoff player decides to make the call as well. So we're going to be going 3 ways to a flop. The flop comes 4-9-6 with 2 hearts, so don't really have much of anything. Not really willing to put money in on this board. I check it, but action does check around. The turn looks pretty freaking good. The turn is a 10 of spades, which now brings in a backdoor flush draw as well. When action starts to me, I'm pretty sure I have the best hand here, like a lot of the time. We can charge a lot of flush draws and maybe some weird straight draws such as like queen jack, etc. So now I decide to put in a bet of $50. Well, to my surprise, the big blind decides to bump it up to $150. The cutoff folds, and I think he can have a lot of bluffs here, or semi bluffs rather. So I think this is a pretty easy call, and we're off to see a river. The river comes, and it is a offsuit 6. So it pairs the middle card, probably one of the best rivers I could ask for. If I was ahead on the turn, I'm most likely still ahead. It reduces set combos and every single draw possible bricked out. I check it over to him once again, and now he throws out $200. I think this is a pretty easy call. I don't really think about it for too long, and I toss in the 200, and wow, he shows pocket 9s. Expected a lot of sets to bet on that flop, but luckily for him, we get a 10 on the turn, and he gets what is probably the maximum. Nice hand. I'm not gonna lie, I'm pretty frustrated at this point. I was up over $1,000, and now I'm down over $1,000. So the swings in this session have been absolutely crazy, and unfortunately for us, it looks like the table is about to break. Hopefully we can get something going in this last hand. In the last hand of the night, we look down at 2 red aces under the gun. Let's go. It's about freaking time we get a hand. I open up the action to $20. We see a call from the cutoff, and now the button blesses us with a raise. He makes it $125. Let's go. Hopefully we can get some money back. The small blind now decides to call the $125. Wow. The big blind folds and the action is now on me. I'm sitting with a hair over 900, so it's a bit of an interesting spot. I think jamming here actually isn't bad because it would just look so ambitious and like bluffy just with all the dead money in the middle. But I really just want to get the absolute maximum, so I just decided to make it 375. The cutoff folds and now the button calls the 375. Let's go. Action's on the small blind and you will not believe it. The small blind jams all in for around $1,500. We are getting absolutely blessed out here. Obviously, I'm not going anywhere. I hem and haw for a little bit and obviously make the call. And now the button pretty quickly makes the call as well. Let's go. We're going 3 ways to a flop where we are all in. The main pot is around $2,700. So if I'm able to win this, I will probably have the swingiest session of all time. We table our hands, and as no surprise, we're up against kings and the button has queens. Are you kidding me? We are in the best shape possible, but going 3 ways to a flop, you can never be that comfortable. The flop looks good. The flop comes jack high with 2 hearts. The turn is now another heart, and we do have the ace of hearts. We're off to see a river, hoping to fade the last queen or the last king, and boom, it is a 7 of spades. What a clutch triple up for one of the last hands of the session. Wow. Now we are up $700 on the session. Let's go. Okay, I lied. Sorry. I forgot I had one more hand. In this one, we're in the cutoff with not the best hand in the world. We have king 5 of hearts. There's a button straddle and there is 2 limps to me. I decide to make it 55 and we only see 1 call from the player in middle position. So we're off to see a flop. The flop looks pretty good for our exact hand, to be honest. The flop is 5-6-4 with 2 spades. We have middle pair. When he checks over to me, I decide to put in a C bet of $50, and now he decides to make the call. We're off to see a turn, which is not that good. The turn comes a deuce. So now any 3 makes a straight, and he does decide to lead out for $100. I don't expect him to have too many 3s here. There is a backdoor flush draw, and there's still a lot of draws that are available on the board. So I'm not fully convinced at the moment. So I decide to make the call, and we're off to see a river. So the river is another 4. All the draws brick, and now we are sitting with 2 pair. He checks it over to me, and this is a spot that I think if he still had a straight, he'd continue to bet. So I think we most likely had the best hand here. It's kind of hard to figure out what I can target, but this player is known for action, and I think he can call us down pretty light. So when I think I'm ahead, I think I'm just going to bet here. I throw out $125, and he thinks for a little bit and does decide to make the call. I show my pair of 5s, and we are good for the last hand of the night. Wow, what a swingy session. We ended up cashing out for over $1,000 profit after being up 1,000, stuck 1,000, and then once again finishing up 8,000. Hope you guys enjoyed the hands.
What's up, YouTube? And dude, literally, dude, that was the craziest session I think I've probably ever played in terms of swings. If I remember correctly, we were up $1,000 pretty, not early on, but like, you know, throughout the session we chipped up, we played well with that ace-queen hand where we essentially hero called with top pair for our stack, and that put us well into the black up around 1,000. And then there was that one hand where I had queen 10 off and basically just triple barreled just because I didn't think he had a strong hand, which he didn't, but he made a very impressive call, which made us even. And then there was the, let's see, there was the 10s versus queens hand, the queen 10 versus flop top set turn vote. And yeah, basically we were stuck 1,000 just like that. But thankfully, that last hand where we had aces versus kings versus queens, that's just so nutty. And luckily, aces hold for us. But that's just, it's the swings, man. It's the way it goes. Luckily, we were on the good end of it. Hope you guys enjoyed this one. We were in for 2,000, and we were out for a little bit over 3,000. I'll put it right here. But anyways, guys, hope you guys enjoyed this one. If you haven't already, please hit the thumbs up and subscribe. And yeah, thanks, guys. See you guys next time.